Imagine this. The year is 1929. Jazz fills the streets. Champagne overflows at Wall Street parties. Everyone believes the future has no limits. Stocks can only go up. And America has finally beaten the laws of gravity. But somewhere, behind the glitter and confidence, the clock is ticking. And when it stops, an entire nation will fall to its knees. What happens when human greed, optimism, and blindness collide with reality? This is the story of how dreams turned to dust and how one crash redefined a century. The age of illusion, the 1920s, a decade of roaring prosperity. Cars rolled off assembly lines, radios connected millions, and skyscrapers climbed toward heaven. For the first time, ordinary Americans felt like insiders in the great economic game. The stock market wasn't just for the rich anymore. A teacher, a clerk, even a farmer could walk into a brokerage office and buy a piece of the American dream, often with borrowed money. Banks were lending freely. Margin loans let people buy $10,000 worth of stocks with just $1,000 down. It felt like a cheat code for wealth. But behind this euphoria was a dangerous delusion that prosperity was permanent and risk was obsolete. Economists, journalists, even political leaders echoed the same message. The fundamentals of the economy are sound. Those words would soon become a tragic echo. The fever builds. By mid-1929. Wall Street was no longer a place, it was a fever. People crowded around ticker tapes as if watching destiny unfold. Andrew Ross Sorkin describes this period with almost surgical precision, how optimism became hysteria, how speculation turned into a national pastime. Every success story fueled 10 imitators. A man could make a fortune in a week and lose it the next day, but no one believed the music would stop. Even seasoned financiers like Charles Mitchell of National City Bank, what we now know as Citigroup, encouraged the frenzy. His bank extended credit to anyone who asked. The market's rise was their proof of righteousness. But beneath the charts and champagne, cracks were forming: unseen debt, fragile confidence, and the false assumption that markets were immune to human emotion. The spark? Then came the tremors. September 1929. Stock prices wobbled. A few cautious investors began to sell. It was barely noticeable at first, like a whisper in a crowded room. But whispers can spread faster than truth. Then came Thursday, October 24th, Black Thursday. A wave of panic hit Wall Street like a storm. Prices plummeted. Brokers screamed across the floor. Crowds gathered outside the exchange, their faces pale, eyes wide. The great illusion was cracking. And what shattered wasn't just wealth, it was trust. The collapse Monday, October 28th. A new week, but the panic didn't stop. The ticker lagged hours behind as prices spiraled downward. Telephone lines jammed. The next day, Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, the dam finally burst. Over 16 million shares traded in one day, an unimaginable number for the time. Fortunes evaporated. Banks faltered. Investors jumped from rooftops, literally and figuratively, as the American dream collapsed in slow motion. In the chaos, Sorkin shows us the anatomy of collapse. How leveraged bets magnified losses, how public panic turned private debt into national disaster, how a psychological contagion infected millions who never owned a single stock. By November, the market had lost nearly 90% of its value. The Roaring Twenties ended not with a whisper, but with a roar that echoed for generations. The human cost, but behind every statistic was a story. Families losing homes, factories closing overnight, dreams deferred, and dignity stripped away. Bread lines stretched across city blocks. Children carried tin cups instead of lunch, and once confident bankers, brokers, and workers alike stood shoulder to shoulder in unemployment lines. This wasn't just an economic collapse, it was a moral reckoning. The same society that believed in infinite growth was forced to confront its own fragility. Money wasn't the villain, human emotion was. Fear, greed, denial, the invisible forces that still rule markets today. Lessons hidden in the ruins. Andrew Ross Sorkin's brilliance lies not just in recounting history, but in decoding the psychology that drives it. He shows how the 1929 crash wasn't caused by one event, but by a chain of small choices rooted in overconfidence and illusion. No one thought they were doing anything wrong. They were simply following the crowd, chasing safety in numbers. But markets, like human hearts, don't stay rational forever. The lesson: every boom carries the seed of its own collapse. And every collapse teaches the humility we ignored during the rise. That's why the crash of 1929 still matters, because every generation faces its own version of it, whether in housing, crypto, tech stocks, or personal ambition. The question isn't if another crash will happen, it's whether we'll remember what we learned from the last one. Transformation and reflection in the aftermath. Reforms reshaped America. The Securities and Exchange Commission was born. Banks were regulated, transparency became law. But perhaps the greatest change wasn't in policy, it was in perspective. The crash forced people to see money not as a measure of worth, but as a fragile promise of trust. It reminded a nation that progress without wisdom is just noise, and that true stability is built on discipline, not delusion. As Sorkin reminds us, markets rise and fall, but character endures. So, as we look at today's world, new bubbles, new booms, new risks, remember, the faces change. The technology evolves, but human nature remains constant. Every chart, every trade, every risk, begins and ends in the human mind. What would you have done in 1929? Would you have sold early, or believed the dream until the end? Let's learn from the past before we repeat it. Because wisdom, like wealth, compounds only when we protect it.